Hey, I just thought I would make a little fireside chat with all my friends and family, former students, and mainly because with this election cycle and all of us trying to post stuff to express our opinions or desperately trying to say information that we feel we want to get across to people, um, the internet is very limited in the sense that tone is misrepresented. It's people are missing kind of the points of a lot of people say, or they just don't want to listen, understandably, because they're just inundated with it information. I myself, I know it's hard for people to believe, but I really don't like politics, and I would rather just read poetry and listen to music or take walks. Um, I think that in a sense that's what most people feel. We want to have barbecues with our family. We want to chill. That is what most human beings want to do, regardless of their political perspectives. But um, for me, I just want to kind of really clarify why I've been making such a strong stand about Bernie Sanders, um, and why I want to change so badly the economic system in particular that we're dealing with here, and how my travels have really shaped my impressions that I already had, and really solidified a lot of my ideas. And I'll try to be brief. Um, so, just to say that I already was critical of many things going on in politics before I even traveled. Everybody, I mean, I just want you to keep in mind that I have grown up in what would be considered lower income white neighborhoods and lifestyle mainly. Not a bad life, but on an economic scale, a little bit lower. When I grew up in Modesto, California, I was beat up a lot by gangs of kids that were white, by the way, white on white crime. And I realized that socioeconomic policies, like, I mean, in a sense, I wasn't thinking about it so deeply, but as you get older, you realize that wherever people are struggling, and maybe not as much as other communities, but they turn on each other, or there's a much more harder reality. If many parents are on drugs or are hard drinkers, there obviously is more domestic violence, and these things come out. Um, and with how the kids are, actually, I had some bullies that used to terrorize us at a park. I discovered that one kid was growing up in an orphanage, having a pretty hard life himself. So you start to realize that, when you're in the struggle, people aren't always so good to each other, and that doesn't matter who you are. And then, as I started to read and try to examine more of politics, I started noticing that the US government supports dictators if they're good for economic interests, like United Fruit. There's a business interest. So if you look at Latin America, I challenge anybody to look at the death and destruction that has been supported by the United States if it favored US business interests. And if those interests are challenged, then they point out all the human rights atrocities that are happening there. Now, my mom always made the saying, two wrongs don't make a right. So I'm not, it, one doesn't want to just defend bad policy by one government because it was opposed to the bad policy of the other. But clearly there is hyper hypocrisy taking place. Even now, I just want to say that while I was in Hong Kong and in the middle of the demonstrations, and the US government was condemning or making a stand verbally with the people of Hong Kong, and while they've been condemning what's happening in Venezuela, Chile has been having demonstrations where I'm pretty sure that there's been more people killed by the government there than what the police have accomplished in Hong Kong to the people. But you don't hear about it because that's a government supported by the US government. And by the way, also, in 1973, when a socialist was elected, the US government willingly, with the CIA, overthrew that government and put a military dictator to power, Pinochet, and he tortured many people. I have friends with family members who had their genitals had very bad things happen to them under that regime that the U.S. government used to save people from socialism. Okay, so I was always very cynical about U.S. foreign policy. Not anti-American, not my own country. I'm not a pacifist. I have a lot of friends in the military, but really cynical. The Iraq War, though, I can't even comprehend how this isn't seen as one of the most tragic. It's not just a mistake. That's grotesque to just say it's a big mistake, like Trump has called it one of the worst mistakes. It's a moral catastrophe. And I don't need to go into details about it. If you haven't figured that out by now, you're just not wanting to examine really, okay? We were lied to about weapons of mass destruction. And that was used as a pretext to attack a country that didn't attack us. And look at the results. Okay, so it's bad. So yes, I became very cynical about mainstream politics. And these things were supported by Democrats, by the way. Mainstream Democrats. Now, when I went traveling, what did I see? I saw that every country that I was in had universal health care. Every country. And I had many discussions about the way the social programs work in Europe as opposed to the way they do in the United States. The United States has over $1 trillion debt for student loans. Now, some of you are going to say, it's not our problem. You all made the choice to get those loans. You used the choice. But you know what? The banks also chose to give out huge loans, knowing that people can't pay them back. And especially for younger people, being quite desperate to just get out of poverty, to have this good work ethic and to better their lives, not really understanding the repercussions of some of these loans, being seduced into places like Heald College or some of these for-profit private schools that charged more than public schools, but then also had very little in returns for the students. So there's all this kind of thing. When we look at the fact that we pay for more in healthcare than almost anybody else in the world, and this is what you want to think about. If we had our taxes increased to the way that Europe has that to get universal health care, we would still be paying less than what we're paying here. My traveler's insurance, as I posted this on Facebook, my traveler's insurance covered me for less than $100 a month in every country in the world for the most part. And they said, but not in the United States. And I asked why. They said, the United States charges way too much. Now, here I am in my 40s living in a country. I've never had insurance. I've never been able to afford it. There's been the Affordable Care Act. It's helped some. I looked at my budget. Okay, yeah, I guess I should be putting out more money, but I'm also paying quite a bit for the college loan. And I'll never get out of that. I'll never get out of it. Okay, I took it. All right, but it's you mix that with getting insurance that's not even going to cover me fully. Who wants this? And you're looking at the drug crisis and the homeless crisis, okay? It's easy to blame Democrats. Now, I'm a critic of both parties, okay? You look at California and Portland, and you see the massive homelessness and the drug problem. But the opioid crisis is also something that's been contributed by Big Pharma. And that has been something that both parties have not wanted to deal with. You know, this Republican idea that people have to pull themselves out by their bootstraps actually can't work with somebody who's on heroin, because their body is physically addicted. They can die at a certain point if they're not having it. It's that deadly of a drug. It's that kind of death trap. And so what is going to be the solution about this? Just saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps is not going to work. But just throwing money out for programs that are not that effective isn't clearly working either. It's going to take a much bigger set of projects to deal with this. And when we have things like the coronavirus happening, and you have massive amount of homelessness and people on drugs that are dealing with that, this can be a recipe for disaster for everyone. And it's a tragedy. And it's a tragedy. For me, if you really care about people, why is it, and this is what I want to ask all of you, you're willing to spend so much of your tax money on a military apparatus, to have police, all of these kind of things, but if your fellow American is sick and needs to deal with their cancer, you would rather let them have to have a GoFundMe. By the way, nobody in Europe has a GoFundMe to try to get through their medical bills. This is insane. That doesn't happen in Canada either like that. Like, not in this case. That'd be a very rare exception. I don't think there's any. Because people actually take care of each other. No conservative in Europe is against universal health care. Germany has had universal health care since the 19th century. And universal health care can be socialist, like the British did at the end of World War II, or it can be like the very heavily regulated insurance system that the Germans implemented and places like the Netherlands have. But they have everybody covered. Nobody in Europe thinks that Bernie Sanders' economic policies are radical because they already think that there's certain basic things that should be provided for their citizens in most of those countries. And yes, they have people who are against that as well. And many of them come to the United States. And then people from the United States think this is the thing. Look, no political party has tried to try to get rid of universal health care. But here, it's seen as radical. So I look at what's going on, and the fact that Bernie Sanders is considered so odd is really, in my opinion, showing how odd our whole mindset is. Okay? Now, look, you talk about his support of dictators. Let's go back to this. Why is nobody complaining about the fact that Democrats and Republicans have been supporting the Saudi war in Yemen? How is it that we are supporting oppression of people in Chile, but we're critical of it in Venezuela? And it's very interesting that when Trump gave his State of the Union speech, and he didn't want to shake hands with Nancy Pelosi, and then she made faces and then tore his speech up at the end. But when the one that they love from Venezuela, was it Guaido, was invited there, she turned around with doting eyes, and then her and all the Democrats and the Republicans clapped for their hand-picked elite of Venezuela. That is what is very worrisome. What's worrisome is that, and I voted for Obama, but I want to say, AM radio was saying, I remember when he first ran, all AM radio, and I listened to the right-wing conservative stuff. Obama is a socialist and a communist, and then I saw The Economist endorse him, the big global capitalist magazine. And I knew where he was going to really be at. Okay? And if you look, Bush bailed out the banks, Obama bailed out the banks. Bush gave the Patriot Act and took away civil liberties from us, and then Obama did the same thing. Obama, with Biden, deported more undocumented workers than any other previous president. That's actually true. But the reason why nobody knew that is because the Democrats didn't want to take credit for that to their base, because they know that that's not really the politics of their base. And the Republicans didn't want to give credit to Obama for doing something that they would support. But now they bring it up now when there's Trump and act as if everybody else is hypocritical. No, the reality is that we keep getting this smoke screen where one side does one thing and hides it or kind of marginalize, does something off to the side, and we're all just being kind of duped. So this then makes me say this a few other points. A Trump supporter and a Bernie supporter, what they do have in common, many of them, is that they're not party loyalists. They're frustrated with the system, and they're taking several different approaches to it. Now, here's why I'm so against Trump. I don't think that any discussion about any topic can't be done in a way that's understandable. I mean, do we have open borders or not? If somebody says that we shouldn't have open borders, most people in the world, most nations will have that discussion. But the demonization of people is what many people feel is similar to fascism or to the far right and a very bad kind of politics. If you Google Trump's reading the poem about a snake, referring to a snake that's helped by somebody, and when it gets revived, it bites them and kills them. He uses that, he reads that poem at a rally in application to refugees and to Mexicans, undocumented workers from the south of the border, demonizing these kind of people. He talked about Islam, saying Islam hates us. Now that's grammatically an incorrect statement. But it's a statement to try to get everybody to understand that Islam is the enemy. Now, I've been teaching in public schools for many years, and I've been a substitute, and currently I have been online for another public institution. My students have been undocumented workers or children of undocumented workers and Muslims. And I've made friends with people from all of these tribes. I've had friends that are war vets who have suffered from the wars. I've made friends with people who are refugees from these wars. And I have seen why people from certain parts of the world have been fleeing and trying to come here. And watching them live in terror as not only the state cracks down, but you have thugs and people who are riled up to vilify and demonize them. This is what has bothered me about what's happening and why I do not support Trump. This is my biggest problem. I also think that his irrational actions, I mean, he's got the nuclear weapon. He just increased the nuclear level. There's a lot of problems I have with him, but I feel like really at this point, you're a person that's on board with Trump or you're not. So I don't feel really the need to have that debate. Those things that he does, you rather are comfortable with or you're not. And if you're comfortable with the demonization of undocumented workers and Muslims, there's nothing I have to say to you about that. That's where you're at. You may not be that yourself, but when he does that, it doesn't bother you. And this is where we're at on that. Now, the fact that he sent shockwaves to the system and why you enjoy watching that, I understand that part. Okay? And I think that you also kind of understand where those of us who like Bernie are on with that as well. But ultimately, what I want to say is that I have friends and family who are also of all political stripes on this. And I love my family and friends. And I think that we all have to realize, we're all going to die. And in this life, you got to do what you believe. And what I respect is a person who has an actual commitment to what they believe and feel, as opposed to an opportunist or somebody who doesn't care, just kind of goes with the flow. I want to advocate a passionate belief in doing what is right. And I'm hoping that if our views on how the world should work are not the same, that we're at least, our hearts are in the same place. And if our hearts are in the same place, we're still allies in some way. And if we're not allies. But I'm not here to draw that line right now. I just want to say I hope you all have a good day. And I hope that whatever happens, we don't all lose our minds and at some point get a more happy and healthier world. That's it.